Our next speaker is Simon Hansen, solution specialist at Mindway AI, who will explain how the latest scientific insights can be combined with artificial intelligence to deliver effective early intervention strategies to at-risk players. Welcome, Simon. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Clickers on the stage.
So responsible gambling is something that's becoming more and more important across the iGaming industry. And this is especially true for well-regulated markets such as the Dutch one. We're seeing that regulators are raising the standards and pushing operators to do more in terms of RD efforts. And we are seeing that some operators are struggling a bit to keep up. We are seeing operators who are losing a lot of clients to problem gambling behaviors, needing to invest a lot of money in marketing in order to continuously onboard new customers, and also occasional bad publicity in the media due to some bad cases. So for some, it's starting to become more and more clear that if we are to create a really sustainable business, we need a solid, low-risk customer database to grow on. The problem is, however, that creating this low-risk, sustainable customer database is not a trivial task. Even though we do our best to really sort of promote responsible gambling, to really have the right tools available to players, there will always be some who end up developing problems due to gambling, due to the very nature of gambling itself, because it interacts with some sensors in the brain that can create addiction. So the question is, how can we actually create a setup that actually helps us move towards this low-risk and sustainable customer database? What we basically need is some kind of lane-keeping assistant. So we need some piece of technology that can actually look at a player's gambling behavior and not just identify when the car has crashed into the tree at the side of the road, but actually already when the car is starting to drift slightly away from the road, make a reaction, correct the player's trajectory to help bring them back into control. More specifically, we would need such a lane-keeping assistant to be able to show us our entire customer database and to identify those players that are currently not exhibiting any risk, but also, very importantly, those players that have a high risk of experiencing severe harms due to their gambling behavior. And also these at-risk players where we still have a very good chance of bringing the player back into control if we are smart about the interventions that we push towards this player. We also need to be able to go and have a look at the individual player to understand the risk that a player is currently at, but also why this person is at risk. Understand what risk factors this player is exhibiting at the current time, and actually be able to identify some of these early markers so that we can push personalized early intervention that actually prevents behavior from escalating and the player moving towards a high-risk state. We need a lane-keeping assistant or a system that actually allows us to take our business rules, so the way we want to do responsible gambling, and actually create a system that in a very efficient manner directs our attention towards these customers that require our immediate attention. And then trigger either manual interventions or automatic interventions that fits with the subtype of the player's gambling behavior, but also the severity of the risk that they're currently at. And where we can also log players that we want to follow up on in some time and actually receive alert that, hey, now it's time to take a look at this player again and decide what's most appropriate now. We also need a system where we can actually evaluate how we are doing over time, where we can actually sort of see the relative size of each risk segment over a longer time period and quickly evaluate, are we moving towards a healthier customer database? Or are we actually moving in the wrong direction, seeing more and more high-risk gamblers? And if we are to be truly ambitious and really create this low-risk environment, we also need to be able to go in and evaluate our product portfolio. So actually look at the different products that we offer and say, okay, what's the average risk score of people who interact with these kind of products? And do we have any particular products where we see a lot of high-risk gamblers centering around? And can we actually put in front of these products some extra safeguards that helps reduce the risk of players interacting with these products? Now, at Mindway AI, we have developed a system that does exactly this. We call it the Game Scanner solution. And what makes the Game Scanner solution truly unique is that we are combining the power of human expertise, so people who've been working with problem gambling for a long, long time, together with powerful AI models. So when we started developing Game Scanner, we saw a lot of people working within the iGaming industry relying on threshold-based model to identify problem gambling behavior. We see people defining maybe 10 different risk markers saying, oh, if you exceed this amount of deposit volume in a day, if you spend more than X hours per week, and so on and so forth, then you're an at-risk gambler or problem gambler. But it should be pretty clear that with this simple approach, given the complexity of problem gambling behavior, we cannot hope to capture everyone, right? There might be one person up here who's not exceeding the thresholds, but is actually experiencing quite severe gambling problems, maybe because they have less disposable income compared to other people. So we cannot hope to be truly efficient with this approach. We need something more sophisticated. What we in fact need is a system that looks at the individual player, looks at their behavior over a longer time period, and identifies what risk factors is present for this particular player, looking at the overall behavior of the player and taking that into consideration. So we're not looking at each factor in isolation, but really understanding this whole situation of the player. And we need the system to be able to do this, not just for the ones we maybe already lost to problem gambling behaviors, where the only solution might be total abstinence, but also for these at-risk players, where we might still have a chance to bring them back into low-risk gambling. How do we actually do this? Well, if one is to train an AI model, one would take a lot of data and show it to the algorithm. So let's take the case that we want to train an algorithm to tell us whether there's a cat in a picture or not. We would show the algorithm loads of cat pictures. We would show the algorithm loads of pictures without cats. And once we've done that thousands of times, we would be able to show it new pictures that it's never seen before. And with a certain percentage, it'll be able to indicate whether there's a cat in the picture or not. The thing is that we can actually do this for problem gambling or responsible gambling. So we can have experts, so these experts have been working with problem gambling for a large part of their life, who know all of these early markers to look out for and how problem gambling develops over time. And they can actually look at some quite complex visualizations of the player's behavior and actually understand, okay, is this a person at low risk or medium risk, high risk? Why is it a high risk person? In which direction is the player currently moving? I just brought with me an example of one of the graphs that the experts are using when they're making their player evaluations. What we are seeing on the x-axis is each day over a 92 days time window. And on the y-axis here, we're seeing the time of day. And each of these small squares that you see here, that's when the person is active. So the experts can actually look at this sort of pattern of activity and make some quite complex assessment, right? They can look at whether there's, for instance, nightly activity, but not just whether there's nightly activity or not. Also, is the nightly activity just happening in the weekends? Or is it happening during working days? Do we have long extended evening sessions that turn into nightly activity, and so on and so forth? And of course, they're not just looking at time consumption, we're also looking at other known markers of problem gambling behavior. Once we have done this for a lot of different player profiles, then we can actually create an algorithm that in a sense works like a virtual psychologist, all the time looking at your entire customer database and picking out these customers that need our attention. And we can actually do it in a way where the model performs almost as if we had thousands of psychologists sitting every day looking at each individual player and assessing their risk and what direction the player is moving in. So then we in fact have a system that can actually detect whether a person is sort of starting to drift in the wrong direction, whether the car is slowly moving away from the road. But this is of course not enough, right? Because the time where this really starts to create value is when we can actually make interventions based on this kind of knowledge. And for the interventions, we need a system where we first look at the players, the risk severity of the player. Are they currently a low-risk player? Is it a medium-risk player? Is it a high-risk player? For medium-risk players, we might want to promote prevention. We might want to reduce the risk of their behavior escalating further. So maybe we will use some pop-up messages that are sort of meaningful to the player via a positive communication strategy, trying to bring the player back into control. For the high-risk players who are already showing signs of quite problematic gaming behavior, we might want to take more drastic action, maybe sending them an email or reaching out via a care call. And even for the low-risk players, we can still take proactive actions, right? We can promote information, we can promote guidelines, so we can actually create an intervention strategy that actually sort of targets all of our players, adapting the sort of strategy to the risk severity of the player. And we can actually do even more, because as we heard in the last presentation, one problem gambler is unique, right? So they're different from all the others. Of course, there's some common typologies, but in general, we'll find a lot of differences, and problem gambling can look very different. So we need not just to look at the severity, but we also need to consider which risk factors is present for a particular player. So we might have a player that's scoring really high on time consumption, how many days they're playing, and maybe also when they're playing. Well, then it doesn't make sense to simply push them a generic RG message or suggest a deposit limit for them, right? We need some kind of advice on how they can administer their time consumption better. Maybe we have some RG tools available, some kind of time limit or a curfew when you can interact with the site, or maybe some kind of advice on how to better administer your time. And for other persons where the predominant risk factor might be something like loss chasing, number of deposits, and the overall monetary consumption, it might be a whole different story. So we actually have to try to use these insights and select the interventions that we think is the best fit for this particular player, given the risk factors that they exhibit. And what we then want to do is that we want to actually go in and track these players, right? So take all the players that we interacted with, maybe these were all high and very high risk players, and sort of follow their behavior over time to see who's actually reducing their risk score, so who's actually moving towards a more sustainable space, and who's still in the high risk, very high risk segment, where we might need to perform some kind of booster intervention. And if we sort of continuously perform this exercise, we'll sort of all the time be able to go in, evaluate our intervention strategy, take out the key learnings, and decide what are we doing very well that we need to keep on doing, but also what do we need to improve on, what's not currently working well, where we might need to adjust our intervention strategy. That's all what I wanted to present today. We are exhibiting at the expo, so if you have time either today or tomorrow, you're free to stop by our stand or attend one of our in-depth demo sessions tomorrow. And otherwise, I just want to say thank you very much for listening in.